types of macronutrients. Oh, thank you, Shine. I completely forgot to record. Thank you. Okay, so the three types of macronutrients. We hear the term macros all the time, what they are, but I think sometimes it's good to kind of rein in and say what they are. So carbohydrates, protein, and fats. Those are our three main types of macronutrients, and we'll kind of dive into the basics and how they are applied to athletic performance and how they aid your fueling throughout. So the first carbohydrate, or the first macronutrient, carbohydrates, we'll kind of get down to the basics. So these are athletes' best friend. They're the foundation of your energy. Carbohydrates break down into glucose, which is the preferred source of fuel for the brain, muscles to prevent fatigue, and maintaining your speed, power. So basically, this is a big function of ATP generation, or also known as your energy. So carbohydrates break down into glucose. So that's our, smallest form of energy source. And this glucose is then stored in your muscles as what we call glycogen, um, after we consume them. So glycogen or glucose is going to be that primary energy source when you start your activity. It has impact on our blood sugar and the ability for our body to continue the activity it starts, both for, a game, training, etc. So when I say that, or glucose, the breakdown of carbohydrate is stored as glycogen, that storage is limited. And so due to that limited storage ability, the importance of carbohydrate timing and consistency and adequacy for optimizing fueling and refueling is the key to the basics of fueling for athletes. So there are two types of carbohydrates that we like to think of. There's both simple and complex. So simple carbohydrates provide like a quick energy source of fuel and can be used during times of exercise, like right away when you need a quick source of fuel and when you're kind of close to that activity type. So examples might include, white bread, pretzels, crackers, sports drinks, cereals, fruit juices, all those things that kind of we digest really efficiently and quickly to be able to use for energy. And then the second type is complex carbohydrates. So this is what we think about as more of your sustained fuel source. So we can use this energy for later on, and it will kind of almost last a little bit longer. It's what we kind of think of the foods that have fiber in them. So, our whole grains, pastas, oats, rice, quinoa, lentils, all those things that have kind of that heartier feel to them, and they kind of fill us up for a little bit longer and keep our, blood sugars a little bit more stable. And, um, these should really be a priority at like meal times that, might be a couple hours out from your activity. All right, so how do carbohydrates affect athletic performance? So, like I said, it is the main and preferred source of energy for both the body and the brain. Um, and so on this slide, you can see that I kind of put it into two types of athletes that we generalize, both strength and endurance. And I know there's a lot of sports that, utilize both of those things, but when we think of that strength, the quick power, the fast movements, the bursts of energy. So the majority of that energy comes from those glycogen stores. So those are the glucose that's been broken down and stored in our muscles kind of for that later use. So when we have that carbohydrate storage available to us because we've eaten enough carbohydrates, our tissue protein in our muscles and our body in general can be conserved so that those carbohydrates are utilized prior to the proteins in our body. So that's kind of what we think about in terms of strength athletes. For endurance athletes, the ones that are going for long term, far distances, extended periods of time, the carbohydrates that we have stored or are fueling with during exercise are going to be used in combination with the fat stores that we have in our body. So different methods of use here, but overall, carbohydrates really help maintain the intensity, preventing muscle breakdown, and assisting in actually your hydration throughout activity. Reason being is that carbohydrates hold on to water, so when we have enough carbohydrates in our body, we're actually supporting our hydration levels. Sorry, as you can hear in my voice, I am little nasally and a little sick today, so bear with me. Um, Timing. So the small, simple carbohydrates that I went through are the ones that you're going to want to have when you're really close to the exercise or even during exercise. So, because the storage of those glycogen stores are limited, that we go through them pretty quickly. And so fueling during, activity that we need to kind of continue on is why we would want to use those simple carbohydrates. So, refueling mid game with a sports drink because we can utilize those carbohydrates really efficiently and effectively without tapping into our protein stores. So in general, um, adequate carbohydrate is really crucial for any sport, any athlete. Okay. So next macronutrient is protein. We hear about this one a lot. Um, Proteins are, what we think are often stereotypically, heard as like the structure and the muscle in our body, and which they are, but they're more complex molecules, and they really do a lot of work in our cells, pretty much to keep the body functioning properly. One of the most significant roles protein plays is the function in both muscle repair and recovery. So when we've had a long game, a long training, an intense workout, etc., our body's muscles are kind of being torn, damaged, and kind of utilized a little bit, you know, over effectively. So the protein is going to be our support system to help repair that and give you know, our bodies back to the recovery aspect. So what is protein? So they are various forms of what we call amino acids. So amino acids is kind of like the breakdown of carbohydrates of glucose, but it's the breakdown of protein. So a bunch of different types of proteins are made up of various um, compounds of amino acids, and these are really just kind of the building blocks. So there are 9 essential amino acids and 11 non-essential amino acids. Not the 9 of them that are essential, so we need to get these from our diet. That means the foods that we eat, we need to make sure that we're getting adequate protein foods. The other 11, which are non-essential, so our body can produce these amino acids. And really that's based on what we're already, the other foods that we're getting in as well that we make these from. So overall, we need to have a very, balanced intake of amino acids through protein, but that's just kind of the general um, makeup of what they are. So protein also too plays a bigger role than just, making up muscle and making up that they also form tissues, enzymes, hormones, antibodies to keep our immune system up, so that it really plays a huge role in more than just, the strength of our muscles. So that's kind of why it is also a huge push for it being important. So, protein and athletic performance. So again, I broke it down into strength and endurance athletes, both super important for both types of athletes. But um, when we think about kind of strength, it's important for that growth piece, the maintenance and repair piece. So using your muscles a little bit more intensely and to be able to repair and recover more effectively. And then with endurance athletes, having a negative protein balance can actually affect your recovery. So if we're going for long stretches of activity, long games, long runs, whatever your activity may be, if we don't have enough protein to support, those activities through food, then we're going to start tapping into our prior muscle stores. So it can be really detrimental to um, our outcomes as like from training, because we're just going to then go and attack the muscle stores that we've worked so hard to build. So and part of that being is because if we don't have enough, you know glycogen stores or other food sources, that's where we can produce energy from protein. It's not the preferred method, but we can if the other stores are low or depleted. So that would negatively affect kind of our, almost if act as kind of like a catabolic environment for our muscles, which isn't actually, necessarily a good thing. So when we think of timing, we want to spread protein out throughout the day for a steady amino acid availability. So instead of getting like 85 grams of protein for breakfast or lunch, we really want to kind of spread that quantity out throughout the day, so that at any point of the day we have a steady, you know, available amount of amino acids available in case of need to recover, repair, build, etc. So having that, always available source will really create that anabolic or building environment for repair and recovery. So we suggest that we consume a protein-rich meal no more than 4 hours before exercise and no more than 2 hours after exercise. So the 4 hours before we'll dive into that in other presentations, but it's an important part of preparing your body for that exercise, and then again after exercising, recovering. Third macronutrient is fats. So this is the one that we don't hear about as much as athletes. We hear, a lot about carbohydrates, a lot about protein, um, but fats are also super important. So fats are basically our storage form of excess energy. So they are a higher, energy density per gram. You could see the other macronutrients were 4 calories per gram, and fats are 9 calories per gram. So they are basically a denser form of energy, which comes into use for athletes based on their super high energy needs. We know as athletes that our energy needs are significantly higher than maybe someone that's not as active. So it's not always as easy to get the adequate amount of calories through just carbohydrates and protein foods. So we need to add in those fats to be able to meet our energy needs. So that's one, primary reason that we still want to prioritize fats. Another reason is that when we have fat, that actually aids in the absorption and transportation of certain micronutrients. So Micronutrients that we often get primarily from fruits and vegetables are those vitamins, minerals, um, certain vitamins that are fat soluble. So, vitamin A, vitamin D, E, and K all are best absorbed alongside a fat food source. So, if we aren't getting enough fat in our diet, we're all actually not absorbing those vitamins as well either. So that's kind of like a lose-lose situation. So that's why it's really important that we primarily focus on fats at like meal times when we're getting a large balanced plate, typically with a variety of macronutrients within. Um, so also it is because it is an energy dense macronutrient, is that it supports our fullness and satiety. So there's a difference when you would kind of eat a fat or a meal with no fat and the same meal, but it has fat with it. There's the second meal, you're going to feel a lot more either full and or satisfied because again, there's that energy density within it and it's kind of making that meal more complete. So and then lastly, the we'll get back to the anti-inflammatory piece, but that kind of has to do with what type of fat. So there are three types mainly of fats that we think of. There is trans fat, saturated fat, and unsaturated fat. So trans fats are those that should be pretty like more limited in our diet because they don't have as much, nutrient value and they are correlated with like increased risk of heart disease and they're just chemically made and often you know not as don't actually give us the benefit that other fats um may. And they often include, like if you look at the ingredient list or etc. It'll often include the words hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated. Those are how you normally know that it's a trans fat. So trans fat we want to limit. So saturated fat, second type of fat, these are the ones that are kind of we suggest as like a moderate intake. They are naturally occurring, but they do have that same, kind of um, risk of the correlation with like heart disease and such. But they also, a lot of these foods that contain saturated fat are also really great sources of, protein, calcium, iron, zinc, B vitamins, all of those things. So that's why we kind of say we want to limit them. Some examples of those would be like whole fat dairy, red meat, butter, all those things that like not aren't necessarily bad foods and are can be nutritious in their own ways, but again don't really have maybe necessarily the as many benefits as the next one, which are unsaturated. So these are the ones that we primarily think of as like the most healthful type of fat because they have more more effect on kind of like that anti-inflammatory piece, supporting our brain health, our joint health, muscle health. And these are the ones that you kind of come from, where you see in the photo, like avocados, olive oil, nuts, seeds, um, those kinds of fats that we deem as like the healthy ones. So how does it relate again then back to athletic performance? So, like I mentioned, it acts as another source of energy to fuel performance. However, like I mentioned, they are a kind of a slow, dense form of energy. So basically, they just take longer to break down and be utilized by the body and have, more calories per bite. Um, and so that these we're the ones that we're going to want to have a little bit further away from our activity or um, game times. So for strength athletes, oftentimes we want to build muscle, and this requires adequate calorie intake. So it can also, like I said, it can also be really hard sometimes to achieve enough calories as a very active individual. And when we want to build muscle, we need to be in that calorie surplus. So fats can act as a kind of a support system to getting enough calorie intake in order to build muscle. For endurance athletes, this fat can become a fuel source during that prolonged sub-maximal aerobic exercise. So, for example, long distance runners who are going and going and going for miles and miles will start utilizing fat as a fuel source if the carbohydrate availability has decreased. So again, avoid consuming fat right before exercise or during even, lasting less than 4 hours. So really want to prioritize getting healthy fats at meal times, which would be around 3 to 4 hours before your exercise. Um, and um, yeah, not wanting to have it right before an activity due to the fact that we don't break it down and you're not really going to even be able to utilize it during the during your activity, and it can often kind of weigh us down and make us feel a little bit sluggish. Okay, so how do we balance all this? How do we, keep all of these things straight? In general, I want to recommend, like, I want to just share how, each macronutrient has its significant benefits for everyone, not even just athletes. And our diet should really consist of all macronutrients. We don't want to cut any macronutrient out. We don't want to neglect one versus the other. Um, and, it's really truly going to depend on the type of athlete you are, your training schedule, and all the individual factors that come into play with your season. So I'm going to briefly touch on performance plates and kind of show you how all these macronutrients kind of fit into a meal. So, performance plates. So these are the thing, they look like pie charts. And they are basically just showing you the proportion in which these macronutrients should be like in general displayed on your plate. So in the light training day, um, you can see that um, these proportions are differently manipulated than, for example, like a hard training plate. So grains, that is really just taking the place of carbohydrates. But you can see that because it's a very hard training day, that we're going to need a lot of carbohydrates to fuel that fuel that activity. Um, like on a moderate training day, again, we're going to still need a significant amount of carbohydrates. And a light training, or if you're injured, you might not need as many because you won't be maybe moving as much, etc. You can see that lean or protein isn't as significantly manipulated because we always need an adequate source of protein to repair and recover, etc. And then one of the pieces of the performance plate that I didn't mention because it's not like a specific macronutrient is the like fruit and vegetable component. So fruit and vegetable are obviously made up of different macronutrients, primarily carbohydrates, but we like to insert themselves in their own category on performance plates. So we like to, have it be the color category. And so those are another one that's going to be pretty significantly manipulated based on the intensity of your training day. For the most part, unless you're injured or um, not training, all of you athletes are going to primarily be in these moderate to hard training plates. Again, depending on, the season, what day, do you have a game? Do you have double training? Is it a rest day, etc.? but primarily you guys are going to live here. And so you can this I show these because it gives you a quick an ability to quickly visualize a plate. And so rather than, counting calories or counting or weighing, etc., you can kind of just visualize each of these food groups on the plate to help you meet your needs. So again, we'll talk about more of like what these foods are in other presentations. Um, but it is a good place to start in the sense of um, using performance plates. And I'll also say that if you notice that you're using these plate models and you're still feeling hungry or not satisfied, then try and increase the portions, right? So just making your plate a little bit bigger, or moving up to the next level performance plate. And ultimately, as a dietitian, I really just think it's crucial to understand these components to fueling and like, what they are and why we recommend, you have them when you have them and why you have them, because that gives you the autonomy to then, make your own decisions rather than, someone just telling you have XYZ for dinner but you don't really understand why. So the goal is to be able to have, variety, satisfaction, and just in general autonomy within your meals rather than it being so monotonous. So I'll break it down again, like just by um, macronutrients. So in the hard training day, you can see, um, you know, the simple versus complex carbohydrates. Um, they should take up around half your plate. Um, and the next one, protein, again, is going to remain around a quarter of your plate. These are a couple examples of what a protein could look like. It's usually going to be around a fourth to a third of your plate. Um, and there are a lot of various forms of protein that you can get, both plant and animal based sources, ultimately with the goal to build and recover. And then fats, again, you can see they're on the kind of the side here. They're on the side because, again, because they are so energy dense that we need them just in a little bit smaller portions. So I've seen other, performance plates where it shows it kind of just in the middle here as a circle, its own little circle. Um, and I like to kind of describe it as like the garnish to your meal. So whether it's the drizzle of olive oil on your salad or, the sprinkle of, you know, nuts on your oatmeal, the avocado smashed on your toast, whatever. It's kind of a good way to think about it because it's not always going to be the main portion of your meal, but it really should always be there to some degree. And lastly, I just want to do a quick little practice. So this, you know, menu item comes from one of our stations at within the dining hall. And so it is going to include, carbohydrate, protein, and fruit and vegetable fat. Um, and I didn't know by like if anyone wants to call out or write in the chat like which what you think is in what category. So where would the what would the beef be? What would the vegetables be? What would the rice be, etc. Does anyone have any ideas? Yes, no. Okay, no worries. Um, so the meat would be in the protein section. The polenta would be in our grain section. Um, our rice would be in our grain section. The vegetable in this polenta would also be in the fruits and vegetables. Same with the roasted peppers and onions. And then all of the, oils that these, vegetables, etc., are cooked in would consider our fats. So just a good way to kind of think about how a lot of the dishes, like in our dining halls, for example, are already composed of these performance plates. It's just about, how you make them. Okay, thank you. Thank you for bearing with my sinus voice. But does anyone have any questions at this point? Thank you, Haley. And if not, you can always send me an email at this address. Um, if a question comes up, um, more than happy to answer it in that regard. But yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined, and hopefully, we can expand next week. There's going to be so next week is going to be um off off season fueling goals. So it's summer, no one is in like direct season right now. So we're going to kind of talk about, what are the goals of that right now. So stay tuned for that. It is going to be same time next week. Um, and yeah, so thank you so much again for everyone that came. Please feel free to reach out to me, and I will send out a follow-up email with this once I get the recording uploaded to YouTube and all of that. I'm gonna have to